you. We are going to roll right into our next presentation. Ethan Greene is well known to many of you. He was a host of one of the co-hosts of an ISSW down in Breckenridge a few years ago. He's the head of the Colorado Avalanche Information Center and has a pretty diverse career leading up to that, where he started in 2005. Ethan's going to talk to us a bit about the huge cycle that rolled through Colorado in 2019. Welcome, Ethan. Oh, Ethan, we might have a mute button issue your way.
It looks like you're self-muted there, Ethan.
All right, now can you hear me?
In Dolby sound. Oh, all yours, Ethan. Go ahead.
All right, you can see my presentation okay too.
Yep, sure can.
Great. Well, thanks for the introduction and thanks for inviting me. I'd just like to give kudos to the CAA for taking this opportunity to turn their meeting into an international event. It's been pretty amazing to be able to attend. It's a meeting I've always wanted to attend and never really been able to. And great job taking the challenge of the pandemic and turning it into this great meeting. And I'm really, it's been great to see all these talks, and I'm really glad to be able to try to present to you. So I'm going to talk about an avalanche cycle that we had last year in Colorado. Pretty major event for us. It encompassed a large part of the state and had a huge impact on really everybody that was living, traveling, recreating, working in the Colorado mountains. There's a lot to talk about, and I don't have a huge amount of time. We've tried to pack this into half-hour talks a few times, and it's pretty challenging. So I'm going to give kind of a high-level overview and then talk about sort of a few different examples of some of the things that we faced during the cycle. I would encourage you to look for some of the other talks that are out there on the internet about this. Ron Simonois gave a great talk about the highway operations at the Gallatin National Forest seminar last spring. Jamie Yount gave a good talk from the CDOT perspective at the Wyoming Snow and Avalanche Workshop, and Brian Lazar gave a really good talk at the Colorado Snow and Avalanche Seminar or Workshop last year, and those are all online. So first, I'd like to just thank my colleagues. I'm not going to go into the ebbs and flows of the forecast so much during this particular talk, but I do want to highlight the really good work that the staff at the CAIC did last year during this event. It was amazingly challenging, and they really thought outside of the box to try to warn people about the event. And even though it had a big impact on folks in the state, I think their efforts were really admirable and quite amazing. Also, our partners at the Department of Transportation, who really rallied to this unprecedented event, sort of statewide, that challenged the state transportation system in ways that we had never seen. So this was about a 2-week avalanche cycle in the first part of March, and it affected everything that we deal with in the mountains of Colorado: infrastructure, forests, highways, buildings. It produced a large amount of avalanche activity and of a very large size over a large portion of Colorado. So we've seen events that were similar to this that really encompassed a few valleys or a small portion of the Colorado mountains, but nothing that we could see in the records in talking to other avalanche workers and really going back into the historical records, which in Colorado go back into the late 1800s, that produced this volume of large avalanches over a wide area. And in certain places, we saw almost every avalanche path in a drainage run in this sort of size 3 and 4 range. So to talk a little bit about how this happened, this is the snow water equivalent progression for last year, starting in October and going through the middle of April. These are just an array of sites spread throughout the Colorado mountains. And there's really sort of three main events that led to this avalanche cycle. The first was we had pretty good snowfall in October. So we blanketed the mountains with snowfall, and unlike a lot of the years, this was a ubiquitous layer. So really near and above tree line throughout the whole Colorado mountains. On just about every aspect, we had somewhere in the 30 to 50 centimeters of snow. And then that was followed by a pretty dry period. And I think everybody on this call knows what that means. That produced a pretty significant layer of basal facets of depth for us. Then starting in kind of early January, we had a long period of sustained snowfall. These were not huge events for the most part. We had a couple hiccups here and there, but for the most part, it snowed pretty consistently without huge accumulations in a 24-hour period for about 6 weeks. And then when we got to March, we had about a 15-day period with really intense snowfall. This was 3 atmospheric river or atmospheric river-like events. We had 2 in the first 10 days, and then the second one, our third one, around the 12th. And this just loaded everything up with a little bit higher density snow than what we're used to. And really the walls all came down. So next I want to talk a little bit about this period in between the blue and the green boxes here. Because this layer of depth hoar that we produced this cycle was not it was not an unknown problem for us. So this is looking at the number of people caught in avalanches in Colorado through the avalanche year, which starts for us on October 1st and progresses out through September. And during this period, sort of from the end of December into the end of January, we had a really active human-triggered avalanche cycle. So we'd had that formation period in October, dry in November, and then it started snowing again sort of in the middle of December. And we started building that slab on top of the basal facets, and it was really reactive pretty much right away. And we had a lot of people get caught by surprise, a lot of people getting caught in avalanches, but they were mostly small avalanches, mostly kind of D1s and D2s. And then after that, when we started to get so much snowfall in the end of January and through February, we were still getting avalanches, but not nearly as many people getting involved in them. And we started to see avalanches, not so much in the basal weak layers, but more in the storm and wind slab types of problems. Here's the March cycle that we're going to get to eventually. Looking at the avalanche size and in the top panel and avalanche trigger in the lower panel, that really active human triggered cycle is here in this blue rectangle. And you can see that we just had this period where this layer was really problematic for us. We were talking to people about it. We were dealing with it around the highways. And then eventually, as the snow started to pile up, we really weren't seeing much in terms of basal avalanche release anymore. And then again, this is the March cycle where we're going to see a lot of avalanches, and avalanches of a much bigger size than anything we had seen early on. So I want to take you now to this period in time, March 1st, 2019. And it was a pretty good time in Colorado. We had had a pretty active winter. Again, we had this really interesting cycle sort of in December and January. Then we had had a lot of snowfall, and we had stopped seeing persistent slab avalanches nearly as much. We were mostly seeing avalanches breaking sort of in the upper mid-pack and in storm snow layers. And we had pretty good snowfall, above average snowfall across the entire state. As far as avalanche problems, we had gone to low to moderate. We were dealing with persistent slab avalanches. They're unlikely in the northern mountains where it was a low avalanche danger and possible throughout. It was really the only avalanche problem we were listing. And really it was pretty good riding conditions, and not a bad time to be roaming around the mountains of Colorado. And then these storms hit. And so over a 10-day period, again, we had 2 storms during this period, and then a third one outside of it. We got a huge amount of precipitation, around 20 to 30% of the annual precipitation in a lot of these mountain areas came right during this 2-week period. And just to orient you, this bullseye up here is near Steamboat. This is the Park Range. And we didn't see, this area was really not involved in this avalanche cycle. Down here, this bullseye is between Aspen and Crested Butte, and a real focal point for some of the avalanche activity we saw. And then down here is the Telluride and Silverton areas, again, that saw really significant activity during this cycle. This cycle covered most of the southern, central, and part of the northern mountains. So really widespread for the size and frequency of avalanche activity that we experienced. So here's what happened. We had over 1,000 avalanches that we recorded during that 2-week period. A large number of D4s and 5s, about 3 times what we would typically see in the last 8 years. These were primarily naturally releasing avalanches or explosive released avalanches. We didn't really see human triggered activity that was producing those large slides. And we've been scratching our heads about avalanche size. I think this was kind of overwhelming looking at the volume of large size avalanches, but 4 that we're pretty comfortable calling D5s. After looking at and working with Bruce Jameson on his recent work on classifying size, I'm going to go back and look at this yet again, even though it's probably the 3rd or 4th time that we've reviewed some of the classifications that we did. And the impact that the cycle had was, again, pretty widespread. We had a bunch of involvements, 3 people killed, 1 backcountry recreationalist, a guide, a cat skiing guide, and then a resident that was shoveling off a roof and caught in a roof avalanche in the town of Crested Butte. There was also somebody that survived a 2.5-hour burial on a roof avalanche just before, a few days before that. There's 1 county that declared a state of emergency around this, and they actually declared 2, 1 for the avalanche cycle and then 1 for dealing with the flooding and debris later on in the year. We had a number of structures hit. I'm going to talk about one of those events here in a few minutes. Big impacts on the infrastructure, power lines, both main transmission lines and stem lines that are going to some of the more rural mountain areas. A natural gas transmission line damaged municipal water. I'm going to talk a little bit about the rack system damage because I think that'll be interesting to this audience, and a really big impact on the state transportation system. Almost 800 hours of closure, almost 10 kilometers of center line covered in avalanche debris, and a 400+ hour closure, continuous closure on Red Mountain Pass between Silverton and the town of Ouray. And then by March 18th, things had calmed down and we were back to mostly moderate avalanche danger. Not too much after that, we reached low danger, and we pretty much stayed there for the rest of the year. We had a few peaks in avalanche danger with snowstorms because it really kept snowing all the way into June. But for the most part, this cycle came and went quickly in both cases. So we were sort of left picking up the pieces and really trying to convince ourselves that the avalanche danger had dropped so quickly, and then trying to communicate that to the public, because after seeing the devastation, they were not trusting the snow for quite a long time. So now I want to just show you a few examples of things that we saw. Again, these are just sort of handfuls, ones that I thought that might be interesting and ones that we have some good material for. So I want to talk a little bit about highway involvement in the sky chutes on State Highway 91. A really large, widespread array of avalanches that happened near Independence Pass. A large D5 avalanche that happened in Conundrum Creek near the town of Aspen. Some racks damage or mitigation infrastructure damage that we saw in Loveland Pass and Red Mountain Pass, and then an occupied structure with residents involved near the town of Lake City. So this is the 10 Mile Canyon area. It's I-70 running through the middle there. The town of Frisco up in the left-hand corner of your screen, and the Copper Mountain ski area in the lower right. This canyon actually saw a tremendous amount of avalanche activity. There's big avalanche paths that you can see here. They do threaten the interstate, but they don't impact the interstate very much because they have to cross a bike path and through a creek and up a rise to reach the interstate. These paths drop around between 700 and 900 meters in vertical. And so we did have quite a bit of activity in this area. But the area that I want to talk about is right over here on this state highway, so not the interstate. It's the road that runs from Copper Mountain to the town of Leadville. These are the sky chutes. They're called that because they spell sky. And the Breckenridge ski area is sort of just over this ridge and to our right. And you can see in the bottom here, this is a parking lot for the Copper Mountain ski area and the highway running through there. And we had the highway closed this particular day, mostly because we had some avalanche activity on the other side of a pass that's off to our right. And we opened the road up about 4:30 in the afternoon, and the first few cars started going through that closure, and in rapid succession, all of these chutes ran. And you can see the difference in the trim lines. I'm just going to toggle back and forth. The most devastating is the one on the Y chute, the one on the far right, which ran through about 1,100 feet of mature timber to reach the road. And the first 4 cars that came through this road closure were right in this blue circle. So this is what it looked like when I showed up. Again, that whole area that you're looking uphill at was all mature timber. It had to cut through all of those trees, through the creek, over the creek, up the hill, over the road, and then like this cycle, it blew out trees and devastated everything. And then as soon as it got to the road and reached the other side, it pretty much stopped. Here's a little bit of the rescue. On the right panel, you can see again the devastation that it did, and then as soon as it got to the other side of the road, it really stopped quite abruptly. And this is something that we saw a lot in the avalanches during this cycle, is that they had a tremendous amount of destructive power that was sustained, and then it dropped off really quickly. This is Ron Simonois, one of our forecasters, walking across the debris pile. You can see the small trees just in front of them that weren't damaged, but are caked in debris. And 2 vehicles here on our right. You can see the top of a crew cab, half-ton pickup truck, and on the left, the tire of a Subaru station wagon. That tire is circled because in the next panel here is the same tire. This is the car as we are excavating it. It is on its side, as you can see, and it's pushed up about 2.5 meters from the road surface. And here's us extricating it from the debris. Okay, moving on to Independence Pass. I'm going to talk about 2 sections on Independence Pass. This is State Highway 82. It runs over this 12,000-foot pass, which is closed in the wintertime. The first part we're going to look at is Independence Mountain. This is part of the highway that's closed in the wintertime. And then the second is the Star Mountain and Everett groups, which Star Mountain comes from, it's north facing, so it's coming from the bottom of the frame, and the Everett group is south facing, coming from the top. And we're going to see a bunch of overlapping avalanches in that area. This stretch of the road is open in the wintertime. So here's Independence Mountain, again, kind of before and after shots from Google Earth. And you can see some of the characteristics that we saw in these cycles as we toggle back and forth. So we saw a lot of these alpine basins that hadn't run in a long time that actually busted through the lower elevation trees. And then we saw a lot of avalanche paths that were just widened, where they just sort of stripped out the sides, the trees on the sides, and in this case, the island. This area here looked like this. And so you can see here on our left, the large band of trees that was removed and the island in the middle that was thinned out. Moving over to the Star Mountain group, the Everett group is sort of coming from over our shoulder on the right. This stretch of road was actually closed when this cycle happened. We had a preventative closure through this area. It took 11 days to clear the debris through this area, and just overlapping, avalanches coming from both sides. This particular area here, the toe of what we call the Everett B path, overran the road, overran the creek, which has about a 15-meter deep gorge there, and then plowed up, destroying trees on the other side. This is what it looks like today. And again, like we saw over at the Sky Chutes, just real devastation. But if you walk just a few meters past the down trees,
2-minute warning. 2-minute warning, Ethan.
All right, thanks, Brent. It's like you're walking through the untouched forest. It's just clear. I'm going to go through the next part pretty quick since I've only got 2 minutes. So Conundrum Creek, this is the Independence Mountain that we just looked at, town of Aspen. This avalanche, Conundrum Creek, is right here, and that terrain feature just to the north of it is the Aspen Highlands ski area. You can see Highlands Bowl on the far right side of your screen. Here is the Conundrum Creek avalanche, released as a single piece, ran down into the valley and then turned and ran down the valley. I'm going to show you this house here, which has a defense structure. This is standing at the bottom of the slide looking up. That gorge is about 80 meters of debris in front of us. Here's the house that was overrun. You can see the splitting wedge that protected it from being completely destroyed. And here's before and after as the avalanche came down and turned and wiped out trees as it ran down the valley. Real quickly, looking at the infrastructure, this is a snow shed on Red Mountain Pass. You have the East Riverside slide coming from the left and the West Riverside coming from the right. And this is what it looked like after mitigation one day. So the structure was intact, but it damaged all of the internal workings of the snow shed. Again, that's a U.S. highway, so big enough to have tractor trailers pass each other through that snow shed. Here's Jeff Davis, our forecaster for the area, showing the debris pile. We've got about a 50-meter deep gorge on the left and somewhere between 15 and 20 meters of debris on the highway there. Here's a GazX array where it got overrun. The GazX exploder was not damaged, but the shelter on the right that you can, or the left that you can see there was. There's the oxygen farm as it's pulled off. And that was a bit of an effort to clean up the oxygen farm on this. This was actually a mitigated avalanche. We had left this area closed for a while to focus on some other things and came back and triggered this slide. So lastly, this house that was hit in the Lake City area. This is Lake City. These two roads here are closed at those bars, and this avalanche we're going to look at is just to the right of the lower blue bar. So all of these avalanches in red are slides that we documented, but nobody really knew they happened until much later because it's a vast wilderness area that doesn't see much traffic in the wintertime. So here's the house. This is the house of the local sheriff. He and his two daughters were sleeping in it. at 6:30 in the morning when it was hit by the avalanche. The dots in both sides show the relative areas. This is what it looked like that morning. The sheriff ended up kneeling on the debris. His 2 daughters were buried. Later on, we found a dartboard hanging on the wall right here where that dot is. The sheriff, over the course of a couple hours, with help of his neighbors, found his 2 daughters by voice. This is one of their burial sites, and they walked away with no serious injuries. Here's a view of the house after the snow melted. You can see the foundation and the debris spread all the way across, several hundred meters away from the initial site. So that's a really quick overview of what happened. Again, I'd encourage you to look at some of the other talks that are out there. There's a lot more material that we have for this, and I'll take any questions if there's time. And if not, thanks for listening.
That's great, Ethan. Even over the internet, I heard people's jaws hitting the floor. Those are some spectacular images and figures. Speaking of figures, I mean Siggers, we have Robin Siggers with our first question, and Brent will take over questions, and we might have time for 2, I think.
You have the floor, Robin.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Ethan. Great presentation of a historical avalanche cycle. I'm just curious, you have, I'm assuming Colorado has a regular depth or problem, and out of the 3 phases that you identified there, was there anything specifically unusual that created this historic event? Was the early season snowfall of 30 to 40 cms in October to create the depth hoar layer, or the gradual build in January that built the big slab gently onto the depth hoar, or the big spike in March? Were any of those things particularly unusual to create this perfect storm, or were they just happen to be all in combination?
It's a great question, and the answer is it's a little bit of both. So just sort of working backwards, the precipitation events in March were historic and unusual. Looking across the state, you know, we had a couple of sites that recorded their all-time record 24-hour precipitation in the top 10 in a bunch of sites. Sort of we've looked at the kind of 24-hour to 5-day, you know, kind of period. So that was really an unprecedented event, you know, in the top 10 in a lot of places, and in the #1 slot in some. The other 2 events, you know, the building of the slab and the formation of the weak layer, there were some things that were unusual about them, but not that unusual. The October snow that we get, like you sort of mentioned, is not that unusual for us. The thing that was unusual about this particular year was that it was ubiquitous. Rather than having the snow come in and form depth hoar and sort of, you know, northerly facing slopes and clinging to some of the terrain, it was really everywhere. And so that became a big issue sort of later on. And then the building of the slab, again, that was not a normal period for us to have really 6 weeks of that sustained snowfall. But it also wasn't that unusual. So it was both the main issue was having all 3 of those events together, but it was topped off by a record-setting atmospheric river precip event, or a series of them.
Great, thank you.
Brent, I believe that's our last question.
You are correct. We have no more questions from the floor.
Great. Well, Ethan, as people pick up their jaws and restore them into place, I just want to say thanks. I think your presentation really captures, you know, people are thinking of all this potential, but it was realized in your situation with this seemingly 100-year event.
Thanks for the opportunity, and yeah, good luck with the rest of the meeting.
Thanks a lot.